If you're the kind of person who pauses before hitting add to cart because you've been burned by a sub that promised thunder and delivered a whimper, I get you. The fear of spending a lot of money on a piece of gear that ends up gathering dust or worse, shaking loose your picture frames is real. You want to know if the SVS PB5000 or Evolution really lives up to the hype, or if it's just another oversized box of metal that looks cool but doesn't translate into a satisfying home theater experience. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. In the next few minutes I'll walk through the practical side of owning this sub, who will actually benefit from its muscle, and why some setups might be better off without it. First off, let's set the scene. You've already got a decent main speaker system, perhaps a pair of bookshelf or floor standing speakers that handle the mids and highs with clarity. You're now looking for that extra punch in movies, the rumble you feel in a fight scene, or the low-end depth that makes a music mix feel full-bodied. The PB5000 is SV series flagship in the big boy category, with a 15-inch driver that's designed to throw a long, tight low-frequency wave. On paper that translates into a claimed frequency response that reaches well below 30 Hz, and a 2000-watt RMS Class D amp that can sustain power without clipping. Those numbers are impressive, but the real test is how the sub behaves when you actually fire it up in a typical living room environment. I started my own testing by placing the PB5000 on a solid piece of plywood a few inches away from the wall, just the sort of compromise most people end up making when the sub is too big for a corner. What I noticed right away was the sheer depth of the bass during a movie's opening credits. The whoosh of a spaceship launch wasn't just heard, it was felt, and it stayed consistent across the room, not just in the front left seat. That's a good sign because many lower-priced subs either lose definition when you move off the sweet spot or become boomy, turning the room into a cavern. However, there are trade-offs that aren't obvious until you listen for a while. The built-in 295 MHz digital signal processor is a fairly sophisticated DSP that lets you fine-tune phase and crossover settings, but the interface isn't exactly plug-and-play. If you're comfortable using a smartphone app or diving into the SVS Ultra menu on your receiver, you'll get a lot out of those controls. On the other hand, someone who prefers a set-and-forget approach may feel a bit overwhelmed. In my experience, the initial calibration was fine, but you'll likely need to revisit the settings after a few weeks, especially if you rearrange furniture or add new speakers. One of the practical strengths of the PB5000 is its built-in AC line conditioner. Modern hi-fi amplifiers and receivers can be fickle about power quality, and spikes or dips can introduce distortion at the low end. The line conditioner smooths out that power, giving the sub a clean source to draw from. In a house with older wiring, I noticed a cleaner bass response compared to a cheaper sub that didn't have this feature. The lows were tighter and didn't sound wobbly during quiet passages. Now, who should actually consider buying this beast? If you have a home theater room that's at least 15 feet across, or if you're an audiophile who often mixes low-frequency heavy music, think EDM, hip-hop, or orchestral scores, the PB5000 can become a genuine asset. It shines in larger spaces where a modest 10-inch sub would struggle to fill the room with the same impact. It also makes sense for a dedicated cinema setup where you already own a high-end AVR that can drive a 500-watt sub without choking. In those scenarios, the extra power translates into a more immersive low-end that you can actually feel, not just hear. Conversely, if you live in a small apartment, or you already have a well-tuned 12-inch sub that handles your room's dimensions just fine, the PB5000 is likely overkill. The sheer size of the cabinet, about the length of a small refrigerator, means it will dominate any limited floor space, and the bass can become intrusive in tight quarters, even with the level set low. The sub's long-throw driver is designed to project sound waves further, which can cause low-frequency spillover that bothers neighbors at night. In those cases, you'd be spending extra money for power you'll never fully use. Another hidden trade-off is the heat management. The 2000-watt RMS Class D amp generates a decent amount of heat during prolonged high-volume playback. SVS compensates with a large vented rear panel and a fan that turns on when temperatures climb. In my long movie marathons, the fan became audible, introducing a faint whir that you can hear if you sit very close to the sub. It's not a deal-breaker, but it's something to be aware of if you value a completely silent environment, especially if you plan to use the sub for critical listening rather than just cinematic impact.